Hi, this is Pat Moorhead with More Insights and Strategy, and we're here for another More Insights and Strategy Insider podcast. I am joined by my co-host, Melody Brue. Mel, how are you?
I'm well. Excited about this chat. How are you doing?
I know. I mean, listen, any chat that's about AI, I think I'm spending 90% of my time over the last 9 months discussing AI, advising AI, writing about AI, researching about AI. But there's one thing about technology, and technology is cool, but what's even cooler is actually doing meaningful things with that technology. And with that, I would like to introduce our guest, Chintan. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Doing great. Doing great. I mean, we're trying to keep cool here in Texas, but we have good air conditioning, so we're super happy. So, really, your um, first time guest on the show. We really appreciate you coming on. So I don't want to dive right in here. You're CIO, head of digital technology and innovation for Wells Fargo. That's a huge role. I've talked to some of your counterparts at other financial institutions. It's a big deal. And a part of, I know, your challenge is that there's so many new and disruptive technologies coming out that the future degree of success of the bank depends on integrating things.
Yep.
It's a huge role, critical role. Can you talk a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah. The best way to explain how my team and my focus functions is like a time funnel, which is all the in production digital capabilities and experiences. So think of the mobile app, online banking, wellsfargo.com, Vantage, which is our commercial banking offering, and so the whole in market present today being given to the customers experience, both like I said, commercial as well as a consumer. The capabilities that power that, which is where a lot
Right.
of the AI and ML and things of that sort come in, because you need to bring those to market so that you can build those experiences. And then the innovation piece is two chunks of it. So first one is anything which we have a very strong hypothesis on, but we are trying to figure out what the go to market needs to look like, right? So think of blockchain networks in the space, right? What sort of
Right.
DeFi functions we need to build out, right? So there's a lot of product innovation, there's a lot of like experimentation being done there. And then the last leg is all things that we do around research, which are 4+ years out.
Yeah.
And this is where you have like the next generation AI, the work we are doing with MIT around quantum and how it integrates into machine learning plays out. So like the best visualization is that sort of that time graph, which allows us to build a capability matrix and sort of a flow, which is like research all the way to something in front of the customers.
By the way, I really liked in a minute and a half, you listed almost every major inflection point in technology over the last 30 years, right? You hit e-commerce, you hit the web, you hit mobile. We're talking AI, and it also sounds like part of the innovation function. You're a scout for future technologies out there in the future. Sounds like a great job.
Yeah. Also, I've practiced how to make this statement. So yeah, that
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. You also got quantum in there.
Yeah.
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 With all of that, risk and regulatory protection has to always be a major focus. So how do you balance that requirement with financial performance and the heightened customer and investor expectations, particularly as that relates to AI?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good question. So I think there's a combination of, and I'm going to use some sort of a computer science type language, but then I'll unpack it and I'll explain it, right? Because the way
By the
in my
way, we have a mixed audience here, and we have very highly technical people, and then we have the most senior executives who
that's right.
who watch this. So yeah, let her rip.
Yeah, and I will explain, right? Because sometimes the way I'm going to use this is not necessarily how people use it, so to speak. So there's a problem in computer science, but then in strategy also. It's called the exploit versus explore boundary, which is to say how much of your investment, whether it's time, capital, whatever you're thinking about, should go towards things that you already know You have a very clear line of sight into how it'll add value and how much you have to sort of invest time and capital against it to take something to market, scale it, build it, make it bigger, iterate on it, right? So there is the exploit component of things, and then there is the explore component of things that may or may not pan out. But if you don't engage with it, you don't articulate some understanding around it, and then sort of the value proposition back into the bigger ecosystem, then it never actually materializes, right? So everybody in some way, form, or shape is trying to make that decision at any point of time. At the beginning of the year, whether you're doing investment planning, whether you're doing sort of project planning, you are even if you're not articulating it like that, that's what you're trying to do, which is the exploit explore boundary that has to be sort of defined and then calibrated as you go based on where you stand. Risk is a very, very fundamental decision criteria for both exploit and explore, right? So is economics, right? How long will we take to add value, which then means there is a benefit to doing it now versus doing it later and things of that sort. The way we think of this, and it's not very sort of necessarily a Wells Fargo unique thing, but there is a notion of desirability, viability, and feasibility of anything that you do, whether it's the explore piece or whether it's the exploit piece. So if you define the problem and the value proposition well enough, you can evaluate against the desirability of the outcome if you do it and do it successfully, the viability of once it goes in economics of it, and the feasibility of doing it in a safe way, right? All of those play out in that decision making structure. And I think, at least from my personal experience, that has been the most effective way of not thinking of risk as an add-on or cybersecurity as an add-on. Like all
Right.
of these are key components of your initial decision making criteria, and that works out reasonably well in that sense.
Yeah, it's not like you're a company that sells pizzas online and
Mhm.
you can take a risk that might, the whole term fail fast.
Yeah,
You can't fail fast publicly with
can't say.
with production code, right? Just
That's
based
right.
on the very large potential downsides and the relationship that your customers, any customer of a financial institution, expect. So it is different. So you really have to have a good process to do that. And um, so we had read and discussed earlier that you approach AI across. It's an ecosystem approach, right? Conventional, non-conventional players out there across the entire value chain, and uh, it's working out for you. It's a differentiator for you as opposed to going, doing it all yourself, going, completely conventional type of means. Can you talk a little bit about, share with the audience your approach to this, how you approach AI?
Yeah. So let me explain what we mean when we say think of it as ecosystems, right? And I think you can draw parallels to some of the previous sort of transformative iterations, which is when web came along. It wasn't just the fact that you can make a web page; it was the fact that you could do an API call over that internet network. You can actually do some action off of it. You could advise certain thing, some system, some agent somewhere to go do certain changes to the data that is stored, and so on and so forth. So the notion of an ecosystem sort of stems from the fact that when a new sort of a technology surface opens up, right? And think of it as a surface partly because it's not just one technology. It's like AI is not a monolith. There are a lot of
Exactly.
subcomponents to it, right? And when that surface opens up, there are going to be a lot of different players for different reasons offering overlapping capabilities, right? Some with some very strong origin point in certain areas, but not necessarily that strong in something else. So you have to take all of that into account. You have to take the best possible thing that you can build in that context for the original problem, again, where you started from, which is what is it that I'm trying to do? The end game is not to build AI. The end game is to solve the customer value proposition problem. And AI will be an answer to that, very likely, less often than not now. But then you have to apply all the like the economics, time to market, how you go to market, security risk, all those pieces around it. So that's why ecosystems, right? It's really important that it's not thought of as a point solution or a one thing that
That's right.
solves the. Um, and the way we approach it, both in terms of again picking, for lack of a better term, picking a technology stack, is to basically look at it from a perspective of how malleable it is in the longer run, which is how much can you actually tweak it, change it as your needs evolve, right? I'm personally generally very wary of anybody who says I have a soup to nut solution for all problems that exist and all problems that may exist in the future, right? So then that blows my mind away, saying like, I think I was reasonably well
Yeah.
clued in the problem space. You seem like you've already solved things that I don't have understanding of.
Well, and also historically, there's never been anybody who's ever done that before. So been able
Yeah.
to solve
So a
everything all the
lot of
time
people
for
claim
20
they
years.
have, but a lot of people do claim they have, right? So
Yeah.
so that is where an ecosystems notion, where you don't assume that there is one answer for everything, where you think about a champion challenger, you're comfortable with overlapping areas of capability, but then you make the choice which is most suitable for that context,
Right.
plays out well, right? So that's how we pick things.
So within that, you talked about go to market and with those collaborations and partnership models, that's kind of some of the things that help you to expedite go to market. How does AI play into that?
No different in that sense, Mel. AI, so if you unpack the value chain of AI deployments, right, in a very simplistic sense, is your data is the value you're bringing to the mix. The AI itself, which is, for a lack of a better term, just like narrow it down to deep learning neural networks, let's say, right? These are mathematical objects which exist. Anybody can make it as long as you have enough compute, you can build it. But the value unlock comes when you actually train or fine tune, or you actually use your data assets in context of like certain experiences that you're building out, and then sort of these models that get used. So we are super open in that sort of data is the first covenant we protect. Our data, customers' data, shouldn't necessarily become a collective commons for somebody else to build intelligence on top of, right? So that's the first order thing. So
In other words, don't use my data or my customer's data to train your model.
that's right. That's right. And and
Yeah.
and also because financial services, as with healthcare and a few other industries, there's a lot of fact-based things you have to do, as opposed to just language-based things. As an example, if we are talking about large language model, right? It's not a prose generation problem. It's like, yes, you have to build the prose, but then there's a lot of fact peppering that has to happen inside of that. So hold on to your data, build ecosystems around it where you can train using that data safely, right? Collaborate with anybody who's coming up with the next best architecture from a neural network or an AI perspective, right? There are a lot of sort of different branches. Even though Transformers came out in 2017, the attention is all you need paper, as an example, there are lots of branches to it, right? The BERT language family that Google pushes is all encoder based. Then there's the T5 FLAN family, which is encoder decoder, or the OpenAI generation, which is all decoder based. So there are these architectural choices you have to make, and they are not, again, choices you have to make like in abstract for everything at one shot. This model survives everything, right? That is where you collaborate. That is where you engage with the open source ecosystem like Hugging Face, OpenAI, all of them,
Yeah.
and the hyperscalers, because now you're tuning it, training it, scaling it. um, so yeah, so that collaboration, again, contextualized, very very targeted towards who's best, who has done something research oriented which is reusable. Focus on that.
Yeah, I love hearing that, and not just because it's aligned with all the research that I've been doing on this space as well. And it took the industry, and I get a ton of questions about, hey, what's the difference between analytics, machine learning, deep learning, and now generative AI, and how should I should be approaching it. I love that you're embracing open models. I think that's awesome, and quite frankly, your sentiments on data and how to play that. Not only is that a good idea, but legally it's something something that you have to do as well. But what I really got a lot of joy out of is you basically saying, which is not a lot. I don't hear from a lot of professionals in your role, is about the training piece. And there's this inferred training too with generative AI that people have to double click on. So, but again, fascinating technology out there. First research probably came out of it probably 3 years ago, but at More Insight Strategy, I mean, we believe it is, and again, we believe it's going to be a trend, not a fad,
Mhm.
like crypto or something like that. It's here to stay, and super exciting stuff for you. So, um, we talked about industry transformations a little bit, right?
Yep.
We talked about, e-commerce, sorry, just the web to
Mhm.
e-commerce and then mobile first. I mean, culturally, we're a mobile first. That doesn't mean that through a desktop browser, it's not going to be important to be able to do this. But man, anybody. Yeah, I'm Gen X, and it's mobile first with financial. Um, Financial services have to be data first
Mhm.
as well. What does it mean now for you to be AI first? And how do you deal with all the scale requirements that come through this?
Yeah, so there are two or three things. So let me unpack in that order, right? So I think scale, more or less, is fair to assume that it'll be used at a web scale or the scale of your digital experiences, right? So like the most likely scenario in which you will deploy sophisticated AI is going to be experiences like mobile. And so they have to be able to do, like, say, inferencing, forward passing, and even the training cycles have to work in context of that sort of usage behavior, right? So that's a fair presumption to make, but that
Yeah,
has held out based on some of the examples that we have seen so far. So then that has an implication on the kind of infrastructure you have to provision around it. How do you build it, and sort of, how do you optimize it for that sort of inferencing usage scenario? But then you go take a step back, is the other vector coming in through is the kind of data that is usable is also exploding at the same time, right? So now you have addressed the last mile component of, okay, it's going to get used in mobile, it's going to
yeah,
scale organically as digital is scaling, and so this has to be used that extensively. But then there is the amount of like jet stream of data that generates, plus the other data that is being brought into the ecosystem. So now your training capabilities, right? Whether it's full training or fine tuning, right? Because just to rephrase what I was saying, and I think you were saying the same thing, is it doesn't make a lot of economic sense for people to build foundational models unless you're the top 4 or 5 companies who can monetize it, right? So for a Wells Fargo building a GPT-4, if Wells is the only user of it, then doesn't make sense.
exactly. Maybe for some niche,
Very, very small
amazing
scenario.
thing. Otherwise, you'll do grounding to be able to,
Yeah.
yeah,
You can do sort of supervised fine tuning of a model. You can do a
yeah,
lot more prompt engineering, prompt tuning, things of that sort. So you'll do a lot of that. Um, and again, even if you build a ground up model, just to make that point, it doesn't have to be that large, because the corpus of data that you're training on is not like a trillion tokens of corpus, right? So you're basically focused on certain specific data sets. But you have to assume that you have to incorporate open models that we talked about. You have to tune them, which itself is a reasonably intensive, sophisticated work with
yeah,
your data, few short learning, whatever you need to do. Um, so back to the point of scaling. So scaling has to happen in these kind of subsets, uh, relatively independent, but they all have to scale at different aspect ratios for you to be able to manifest itself into that digital ecosystem of assuming it is used as often as digital is used. There is an implication to the inferencing infrastructure and the way you deploy the model. There is an implication to the training and the data sourcing and where you source the data. How much do you do pre-treatment of data before you train, as an example?
yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
Like all of these play out as you go, but you have to back propagate it. If I can borrow that term from neural networks, you can back propagate it from like a digital experience and then back the way down. And that is where you land into like, okay, this is what I need for training. This is what I need for data sourcing. This is what I need for inferencing. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
No, it absolutely does. It does, and it's obvious. You're doing this. It's real, and gearing up for. I mean, generative AI is completely different, and
Yes.
and it's different from machine learning. I mean, there are things that we all learned through the analytics to deep learning to machine learning to deep learning to generative AI, but it is fascinating to hear because you're actually doing it, right? I always call. An enterprise the grand purifier, right? I can talk to a vendor, they can give me a story, I've got 20 years of experience where I was actually had a real job. I'm just kidding.
You're very
Versus being an analyst. But hearing from you, you have to pull this all together
Mhm.
to make this happen. Yeah, makes total sense.
Yeah, Chintan, I heard you say something the other day that I thought was very interesting when somebody asked about your generative AI strategy, and you said you can't just put it in that bucket. It has to be part of the overall strategy. You
Yeah,
can't just say like, here's this. But when we talk about that in, in terms of like AI at scale, there's so much else that comes along with that, right? Like we're talking about responsible AI, the AI Bill of Rights that was issued by the White House. I know you guys are really involved with regulators and kind of helping to, well, you have a solid framework, but kind of helping to sort of endorse that AI Bill of Rights. What is your general approach to responsible AI? That's a big question because I know everybody's talking
Yeah.
about that lately.
Yeah, I'm going to start with a very sort of engineering type answer, right? Because there are some very specific actions you need to take along the way, and then there's like the broader sort of how do we approach this as we go along, sort of a thing. So, right. So I think from a more when we are about to implement any kind of AI based solution, the answer usually from a what you have to do stands falls in three buckets. So first is how do you use data responsibly, but more importantly, how is the data sourced responsibly?
Yeah.
Do you understand the dimensionality and texture of the data that you're using to actually fine tune, train, use whatever variation of models you're using, but essentially protect the data, understand the data, validate the data, deter the data, which is to use in adverse scenarios and things like that. So that's one body of work. Second one is model explainability. The more complex these models become, the more opaque they become, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to do staged training, staged learning, and honestly work with academia to build more techniques where these models can have a higher degree of explainability. Um, uh, so the work that we're doing with Stanford, for example, around the holistic language model evaluations called Helm and things of that sort. So there's work pending there, but that's the second body of work, right? Model explainability, model structure, staging of models. And the third one is the last mile itself. The experience also needs to have the ability where you have human heuristics mixed into it, right? So the experience can't just be a dumb pipe for an AI model. The experience has to have the ability to say, you know what, based on the signals I'm receiving in this interaction, I am not going to use this model, or I am going to use this model, but be fully transparent about how I am sourcing that data and using that model, right?
Right.
Let the user choose if they are comfortable, if he or she is okay doing that, right? And all of these have to play out, right? And if you take a look at AI Bill of Rights, it also sort of breaks it in that kind of cadence in like data privacy, last mile heuristics, right to forget, things of that nature, like layout all over there. So from an engineering standpoint, that bit is very, very useful. Like we have to treat it independently, the three buckets: data sourcing, data validation, model sourcing, model validation, and explainability, and then experience modalities, and then the backups on that. From a more philosophical angle, I do think the model architectures are racing way far ahead of our ability to actually make those models explainable.
Yeah.
So bigger the models, 500 billion parameter Megatron Turing model, it is going to be very hard to explain how much one particular parameter activation is relevant to the outcome. So the bigger, again, like I said, the deep learning as a specific example, neural networks as an extended example, the bigger these models become, the more hard it is to explain why it reached the conclusion it did. And so at some point, this is Chintan's opinion for what it's worth. I think at some point we'll have to intentionally introduce some friction in the mix on the last mile to say, don't use the model. Interact with the customer, see what the customer actually is saying, learning, and learn from that. Bring it back, sparse out the model, distill the model, do something else as a proxy. So more work there, but I think collectively we have to figure it out, right? And the last answer to this one is still you do that. You don't deploy it in scenarios where you think you might cause a customer harm. So like you don't deploy it, period.
So I love that you started with data because having a data strategy that, I mean, has to be secure, there has to be governance, you have to be able to track lineage, it has to be good data. And it goes back to garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
And I really love the way that you ended. And it was funny as you were going through this, I was thinking about the end, which is there are decisions that you make that you have to explain to somebody,
Mhm.
either why you did it or why you didn't do it. And if you can't explain the model and why somebody didn't get approved, did get approved, a transaction went through, didn't go through, you have to explain that. Otherwise, there are consequences for that, other than a dissatisfied customer, which is very, very important. So, and from yeah, definitely best practices as I was going through and taking some of these, taking some notes here. So let's move into, God, this is a question that I get from many. So first off, you have a customer service chatbot, Fargo, right?
Mhm.
Created on a certain technologies that were likely established 4 or 5 years ago. Like a personal banker, right?
Mhm.
Understands, what you've done, what you need. It's pretty awesome. But people are, playing around with Chat GPT. It hallucinates
Yep.
if you don't do the right prompt engineering, or heck, even if you don't have recency in terms of your data.
Yep.
Chat GPT history ends in 2021. How,
As
yes,
we've talked about before, Pat, the media is trying to scare people away from interacting
Yes.
with chatbots.
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So, how are you mitigating this risk? First of all, you did talk about how trusted data and how you're doing that. How are you mitigating this hallucination
Yeah.
risk?
So let's take a step back and see where his hallucination comes from very quickly, right? So in a very large language model, hallucination is a function of the training corpus that it was trained
Yeah,
on, and essentially, the large language model is a mathematical operator. We're looking at probability of the next token being of the highest probability of some kind, right? That being the problem statement, hallucination is more a function of like if you tweak it in a way where you say be unpredictable. Temperature is 0.1
yeah,
versus 1, which is like do the most predictable thing next. That is how these large language models have a function of hallucination, and also like sort of how you repeat the sort of the embeddings, the token width and things like that. But not derailing too deep into that, I think the first thing that you have to be very clear about is, are these hallucinations actually, in some ways these hallucinations are what make these models really really
yeah.
effective, right? Because they are coming up with answers which otherwise you would not have come up with, right? So it is coming up with a generative piece which is like, hey, I didn't see that combination before, but it kind of makes sense now. But the use case that you're trying to solve for doesn't need that creativity, right? So the use cases with Fargo, for example, that we are trying to solve for has need to be doing two things well. First is understand the intent when a customer expresses that phrase, or states that phrase or types that phrase, right? The language capability there is to extract the intent. Everything else is all very transactional or fact based, which has to be retrieval augmented by things that you do normally in our digital banking context, right? So Fargo is a perfect example of what people call retrieval augmented AI, right? Which is you're using AI to do a very targeted thing, which it does well. Not a lot of hallucination plays out in that context, which is to say that either I understood what you're trying to say or I did not, right? There's no create generative piece there. I'm not hallucinating on top of it. I'm just, you said move money from Chintan to Mel. Did I understand that you want to move money?
Thank you.
If I understood you move money, yes. I understood you said move money. Then my next question is from where, how much. That is all API driven, right? This is how you stitch together an experience and the AI together, so that you're actually getting the best of what the API is meant to do, as well as the best of what that AI is meant to do, which at the end of the day is to finish certain tasks for that customer. Um, but if you let loose that chat interface, that instruct interface, I would actually argue that hallucination is actually not a bad thing. It's a feature.
Yeah.
You just need to be very thoughtful about how you're using it.
I love that explanation. I'm glad we ended on this because applications like Fargo are going to be black and white better. Um, and I also really like that you explain the difference between the type of data. What a lot of people are thinking is, that we wouldn't expect non-technical people to understand the technology, right? I mean, they just want this thing to work, and they want it to work really well. When you're grounding it or through prompt engineering, uh, uh, you create the brain in the big model, and then the data is smaller. Your
Yep.
degree of accuracy is amazing in what you can do, and I'm super excited about what it's going to do for technology, and you know trying out Fargo, next version that is enhanced with all these new technologies.
Yeah.
It's super exciting, and everybody that we're advising is to start right here. That is the area that is going to get nearly immediate payback from a customer sat, from an expense, and the data is smaller. And as long as It's learning from these conversations and getting better in the right way. And there's not too much drift. I mean, the sky's really the limit on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we human beings, when computers were not around, language was our primary exchange mechanism, right?
Yes.
Interaction mechanism. So there is a natural precedence to using language. We just need to be very thoughtful about how we use language, just like with humans. So
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Chintan, we're coming up on time here, and I'm telling you, I could sit here for another hour and do this, and I think the audience would love to understand kind of how you're, how you take this amazing world of technology and make your customers happier through all these innovations. But I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll have you on again. You'll come on again.
thank you for having me. You know where to find me.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks so
Thank you.
much. So, Mel, great conversation.
Yeah.
Literally my favorite topic these days, AI. I mean, I'm spending 90% of my time researching, advising, and I know I run the company. We have AI people, we have fintech related people. But when these things come together, great things happen. I'm super excited. Not that I wasn't excited about I would call them fads like crypto and
Yes.
things like that. But this is super exciting, and I think it's going to make a difference for almost everybody's experiences.
Absolutely. I think we're seeing it's a difference in all of industries, but when you really can see how it affects the end user, the customer, I think that's a really important kind of difference to make here is where we can all play around with ChatGPT and whatever, but until it starts to change the way that we interact with our banking, with our,
Yeah,
the people that we want to do business with, just as consumers, this is where I think people will really say like, oh, I get it now. This makes sense. This is going to make my experience better. And now I want to try this. So
I love it.
really, really great information, Chintan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
This is Pat Moorhead, Melody Brue for more insights and strategy. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button. If you have feedback for us, we're all over on social media. You know where to find us. Tune in wherever you are. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are on the planet. Take care.